Hi, my name's Jessica. I'm 15, and my life was turned upside down the day I discovered what everyone was hiding from me. This drama started a while ago. I used to live with my dad in a two-bedroom apartment in a rough part of the city. My mom and dad split when I was a baby. Dad refused to reveal anything about mom and her family, so I got tired of asking. As for my social life, I wasn't very popular at school, but I had two good friends, Alexa and Ben, and we hung out together most of the time. We didn't fit in with the other kids, but we didn't really care. We had each other. There was this one guy at school that I had a massive crush on, Asher. He was blonde, tall, and handsome, but he didn't even know that I existed. But all that changed when Dad had an accident at work and had to go to the hospital. A social worker told me that I had to stay with my grandpa. I tried to tell her that I had no grandparents, but when she took me to see Dad after his operation, he confessed that it was true. And just like that, I was to stay with Grandpa Bukowski, my mom's dad, who I'd never seen in my life. Soon, I was in a cab and speeding to the other side of the city, the part where the rich people lived. I left behind the dirty streets and cramped apartment blocks, and as the roads widened, the houses and gardens grew with every passing minute. Eventually, we stopped in front of a pair of massive iron gates, and I wondered if the driver had got the right address. "This is it," he called to the back of the cab. I was too nervous to say anything, and I handed him a $20 bill. The gates were huge, and I was wondering how to open them when the cab driver leaned out of the taxi window and handed me the change. "Try the buzzer," he suggested before driving away, leaving me standing alone in what seemed to be the middle of nowhere. I just stared at the gates for a few minutes. The black box that must have been the intercom, it had a push button on the front, which I hesitated before pressing. "Yes," a voice replied. I explained who I was, and immediately the gates opened. I'd never felt so scared in my whole life as I slowly walked up the vast gravel drive until I eventually reached this huge mansion house at the top. All I could do was stare open mouthed as a gray haired old man opened the front door. "Mr. Bukowski?" I stuttered. He shook his head and held out a hand. "I'm Arnold, your grandfather's secretary. Now, let's get you inside." The house was unbelievable. The whole place seemed full of antiques and expensive looking objects. Arnold took me into a small sitting room, and I hardly dared sit on the fancy covered chairs and brush my pants before sitting. "I'll get you some tea while you wait. Mr. Bukowski will be with you shortly." I stared at my shabby shoes, my dirty, bitten nails, and worn out sleeves. I wish I'd made more of an effort, but there had been so little time. Who would have thought my mom's dad would have been so rich? And I wondered if I'd finally meet my mom. It was then that I noticed the photographs on the wall. A series of pictures of the same woman, from a baby to a grown woman. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. It must have been my mom. Without thinking, I stood up to inspect the pictures more closely. I held one close and stared at it. "What are you doing, young lady?" The voice behind me made me snap, and I dropped the picture. It fell and broke. "You must be Jessica," the old man said, frowning. "Grandpa?" He stared at me with cold, gray eyes. "Albert will do. Now, let me look at you." I turned slowly to face him full on, feeling awkward as his steely gaze looked me up and down. He stared long and hard. I was happy he didn't get too close. I was nervous and was sweating like a monkey. I smelled terrible. Regardless, I could see the disapproval in his eyes. "We weren't allowed to be untidy in my days. A spell in the army would soon smarten you young people up. You have it too easy. Whatever must your father be thinking about? We can't have you running around looking like that. The neighbors will be calling the police. Your mom would be turning in her grave if she could see you." In her grave? I wondered if I had heard correctly. "Your dad didn't tell you?" His bushy eyebrows arched in surprise. "Your mom died 10 years ago. A car accident. Now, I'll get my housekeeper to run you a shower and show you to your room." With a final look at me, up and down, he rang a small bell to summon the housekeeper. "And fix those fingernails. I can't bear dirty fingernails." And with that, he left. I know it must sound silly, but at that moment, my emotions were all over the place. I'd just met my grandpa, but in the same breath found out that my mom was dead. I've never even met my mom, but now I knew she was gone. I felt her loss. I'd never felt so lonely in my entire life. Before I could think about it too much, the housekeeper swept me away and up the stairs to my room. Oh my god, my bedroom was bigger than the whole of our tiny apartment, and I even had my own TV. I was left to shower with instructions that after lunch I would be taken into the city to go shopping with my grandpa. I wasn't looking forward to the experience, and through lunch felt clumsy, hardly knowing which cutlery to use. Grandpa didn't speak, and we ate in silence. I wondered if we'd get a cab back to the city, but Grandpa had this large Rolls Royce and driver. The first stop was to see my grandpa's barber and get my first proper haircut. I wasn't too sure about Grandpa's idea of a short bob, but then I realized how long and wild my hair had grown. And when I finally looked in the mirror, I looked like a different person. I even thought I saw approval in my grandpa's eyes. We spent some time in a department store, buying new clothes, really cool stuff that Dad could never afford. It felt funny walking into school on the following Monday, the new me, and I felt so glamorous. Even with Alexa and Ben, the new me seemed to cause an awkwardness between us. Ben thought I looked cool, but Alexa seemed angry and envious. I felt almost apologetic. For some reason, I suddenly seemed to notice their cheap clothes and worn shoes, and it made me feel guilty. I tried to carry on as usual for a few days, but I felt the distance growing between us. It all came to a head one Friday night after school when Ben and I argued over something stupid. I was just about to be picked up by my grandpa's driver when Todd and Matt walked over, eyeing up the Rolls. They were the two most popular guys in our year. "Hey, Jessica, we just wondered if you wanted to come swimming on Saturday afternoon with us." It was the first time those two had acknowledged me, let alone talked to me. I hesitated, suddenly overwhelmed. "Asher will be there," one of them added. It seemed that the whole school knew about my crush. I got into the car, arranging to meet them the next day. I couldn't help feeling guilty. I usually went swimming with Ben and Alexa, but they'd been acting weird all week. I was so excited, if not a little nervous, as I headed to the swimming pool the next day. All I could think about was Asher. They were all there, the popular people from my school, and all came to say hello as if I was their long-lost friend. It's funny how a change in my fortunes changed their attitude to me, but I didn't think about it too much at the time. I was only too happy to be accepted for once in my life. "Hi!" Asher came over, his skin still shimmering from his swim. All I could do was stare at his stunning figure. He flashed me a huge smile, all perfect white teeth, and from that moment, I was under his spell. I was having a great time, and when the crowd around me started to laugh, I joined in, not really understanding the joke. I soon understood. Alexa and Ben had just walked into the pool. My heart sank as they approached. I felt so guilty and stopped laughing immediately, but the other guys around me continued. As they passed me to get into the pool, Asher raised his eyebrow toward me, almost as a challenge. "Hey, Jessica!" he shouted out loudly. "Aren't these two your friends?" For a moment, Ben looked me in the eye, but I turned away. He walked on, and everyone started laughing again. Everyone except me. My old friendships were well and truly over, and I tried to push my feelings to one side. I was on a high. I was accepted for the first time. And when Asher agreed to be my date for the school dance, I couldn't have been happier. Back at school, I tried to avoid seeing Alexa and Ben, but as they were in my class, it was pretty impossible. I tried to justify our falling out, that they wouldn't accept the new me, but deep inside, I knew I'd changed, not them. My new friends were fun, but shallow. At first, it felt good not to be the target of their cruel jokes, but it made me feel uncomfortable on the inside. One afternoon, after school, on the day of the dance, I was walking down the corridor with Todd and Matt when we collided with Ben. "You stupid idiot!" Todd called out. "Why don't you watch where you're going? Your glasses are thick enough." Matt and Todd laughed, but as Ben tried to get past, they stopped him, blocking him in. "Aren't you gonna apologize?" Matt said. Ben didn't say anything, but I could see how sad he looked. I could hardly bear it. "Hey, leave him alone, you two." They stared at me as if I'd grown two heads or something. "Make up your mind who your friends are, Jessica," Matt shouted. They moved to let Ben pass, but it was then that I realized these people weren't really my friends. They could turn on me at any moment. I'd been excited about the dance all week and my date with Asher, but somehow I wasn't happy. All I could think about was that look in Ben's eyes. That look of betrayal. I looked great, but I felt shallow and weak. As I stepped down the staircase, ready to be driven to the dance, my grandpa was waiting proudly by the door. I felt the need for a talk, and suddenly everything that had happened over the last few weeks came spilling out of my mouth. I didn't expect my grandpa to understand. He was more likely to tell me to pull myself together. But I was surprised when a look of sympathy passed over him, and he led me into the living room. I'm sorry, Jessica. I shouldn't have tried to change you. It's just that you remind me so much of myself at your age. Money and fancy clothes won't bring you happiness, dear. I've been rich, and I've been poor, and neither makes you happy. But good friends, well, that's what makes you happy. I've been up here for so long on my own that I think I've forgotten how to be happy. Don't make the same mistakes I've made. I never forgave your mom for marrying your dad. I thought that he wasn't good enough. Things could have been so different. Do what your heart tells you. Don't follow the crowd. Be your own person. He hugged me, and at that moment, I knew that we would get along fine together. Things were going to be different. There was also something I had to do. I raced upstairs and removed the new clothes, put on my jeans and an old t-shirt, and returned downstairs. My grandpa didn't say a word, but just nodded his approval. The difference my appearance made. When I stepped into the school hall, I immediately saw Todd and Matt and the look of disapproval on their faces. Even Asher soon gave me the same vibe. Alexa and Ben were standing alone in a corner, and I stepped over to them, feeling nervous. Hey, you guys, can I join you? Alexa and I hugged after I apologized for my behavior. And when we'd finished, I looked around to do the same with Ben, but he was gone. I looked at Alexa for an explanation. Oh, Jessica, you hurt him so badly. Couldn't you notice that he's in love with you? I was knocked out for a second, but then filled with a warm and fuzzy glow. Ben and I had always been close, but my mind had been so full of Asher that I'd missed what had been in front of me all the time. I pushed into the crowd and found Ben at the bar and tapped him lightly on the shoulder. Hey you, I said, smiling. Do you want to dance? After that evening, everything worked out fine. Alexa and I were best friends again, and I started going steady with Ben. I'd never been happier. Dad and I finally moved in with Grandpa, and it's kind of a perfect ending. I learned a great deal about myself and the value of true friendship.